Well, hello and welcome back to No Longer Afraid. I've got to tell you something today. There are no guests with me. There's just me, Anastasia, joining you solo to talk about something really exciting. If you're not watching this by video, in my hand right now, I am holding one of the first copies of No Longer Afraid, my first book. We recorded this a little bit earlier, but when you're watching it, it is May 7th, the very day that this book comes out, and I am so thrilled. It's exciting. I am here to share with you a little bit of my journey with how the book came about. I know I'm usually interviewing incredible people on here and talking about fear and all things No Longer Afraid. But today I felt that it would be appropriate for me to jump on and share from my own journey. And we'll see what that looks like. Hopefully a little more lighthearted. I know I tend to break my heart open a lot, and sometimes it gets vulnerable and deep. And it just has been so powerful to have some of the guests that I've had on the podcast. I know you guys so many of you have been writing and sharing testimonies of just how much it's ministered to you. And I know that there are deep things happening inside of us through these conversations. But today, it's going to be a joyful time. I am going to share with you why I wrote the book. And you know what? As I'm looking at this book right now, I can't believe some of these stories are about my life. Because when you overcome fear and you do the things that you now in hindsight thought you were afraid of, it almost feels silly sometimes. But you know what? There's always a journey. There's always a journey. And if you know anything about me, I talk about this a lot, where I actually do things afraid. I don't wait till the fear is gone. I go after the fear by facing it. And so I think that the most powerful message in our life is the one that has changed our own life, that has transformed us. And this just continues to be the journey of my life. I never realized this until in my later 20s, how much fear had a hold on me. And I think it's so powerful. Many of you know, as we begin to jump in if we're willing, and we jump into our healing journeys and allow God to maybe heal parts of us that have been broken, whether it's as a child or a teenager or even in our young adult years, we start to realize that oftentimes there's a theme that is on that message. And so for me, it's always been fear from a really young age. I mean, from chapter 1, when you discover why I began stuttering as a little girl. But my goal was to really write this book in a way where someone can sit down with their cup of tea or cup of coffee, whichever you prefer, and just read it. It's not a very long read. It's a lot of just stories from my life. Every chapter has an activation at the end of it so that you too can face your fear. You too will have no excuse but to overcome some of the limitations that you've placed on your life because of fear. There are no excuses, friends, to ever hold back in fear, to live in fear, to hide out in fear. And a lot of the stories that I open up in this book are simply that. And so I know I'm a reader. I love to read. I know a lot of people don't. And my goal was to write this book for those of you that don't love to read and would just pick it up because it's a quick read. And so sometimes when you read a short book, you realize that you've accomplished a lot because you read an entire book. And so I really believe that the truths in this book are going to bring so much impact. Believe it or not, those of you that are watching can see the cover. A lot of people that I've showed this cover to, like close people, they thought this was me. This is not me, because I was writing to the broken version of me. And so we found this incredible woman, and she's on the front of this cover, and it's not me, but she's daring and learning to live without fear. So yeah, I love that God just kept bringing this journey back of no longer afraid. I think I shared in like maybe the first or second podcast of how I even came to this journey of realizing that I'm supposed to write the book, and I'm just not that person. I love to read. I don't necessarily love to write. Like, I love to journal. I love, to write things on paper for myself, but not necessarily for an audience. And so I felt like this was such a vulnerable step for me when the Lord started to speak to me about this. And again, facing fear, and I kind of just said yes. And the thing about the writing process and the writing journey was that it takes discipline. A lot of things that we receive from God can happen in such spiritual moments. They can happen in the presence of God where we're just infused with faith and power, and we're like, yes, Lord, I'll do it. And then when Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday come around, we forget about our commitments. We forget what we even promised God at the altar. And so for me, it was one of those things. If I'm going to do this, I better sit myself down in that chair every week and write the stories. And so I think it's been so powerful to be able to just even do this for myself and for anybody else that decides to read it. And so I want to share with you guys actually the epilogue of the book. I know that not every book has an epilogue, but mine does. And just in case you don't get to it because you can't read that far, and I would love to share with you the epilogue of No Longer Afraid. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. I was 3 years old when my family moved to America. We were refugees heading to our dream destination, and none of us knew the language. My parents wanted to give us a better life. So when we arrived in a small town just outside of Los Angeles, it wasn't quite the America we expected. It was more like a hot desert filled with Joshua trees and a whole lot of nothing around. At the end of the day, though, it was America, and that's what mattered. As we settled into our rental home in the desert, my life faded from the comfort of my mother's lap and playing with dolls in the kitchen to another beginning called kindergarten. Already struggling with using my voice in my own language, I had to start all over with English. I felt like a fish out of water, struggling to grasp the English language amidst the sea of unfamiliar faces. Amidst the chaos, there was a beacon of light. Mrs. Abraham. Her hair was neatly done, and her outfits were always perfect. I didn't know what she was saying most of the time, but her kindness spoke volumes. Each day when I walked into her classroom, she would give me warm hugs, and I could smell her perfumed scent of roses. She would do her best to communicate one-on-one with me. I would sit there and stare at her cherry red lips as she'd teach me new words by matching them with pictures. Shortly into this new school year, I sat at my desk weeping, staring at my name tag. How did I end up with such a long name? And how in the world was I ever going to memorize it in English? Through hot, painful tears, I noticed Mrs. Abraham run over to gently assure me that I could shorten it from Anastasia to Anna until I got the hang of spelling it. This is how I got my childhood nickname, Anna. I stayed silent for months, trying to understand and shape out the words formed by Mrs. Abraham's bright red lips. I knew I could trust Mrs. Abraham and thought maybe one day I could be a teacher like her. Anybody else dream of being a teacher when they grow up? After school chaos was in full swing in the Flamenco household. All my kids were chasing one another around the house, yelling, and Familiarity of my childhood home filled the room. Like my mother, I was in the kitchen prepping food for some guests that we were expecting that evening. From the corner of my eye, I could see my phone vibrating on the counter. I glanced to get a better look at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number from Victorville, California. I smiled at how ironic it was because Victorville was the town that my family and I first lived in when we came to America. It was probably a scammer, I thought. That night, after hosting guests and getting the kids to bed, we had 4 at the time, counting all the foster children, I scrolled through my phone as I went upstairs to bed. There was a voicemail from the Victorville number, so I pressed play. The woman's voice was steady and sweet. Definitely not a scammer, I thought to myself. Hello, I am hoping this is Anastasia's number. If I have the correct number, this is her kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Abraham. I froze in my tracks. She continued, I have been searching for her contact for many years now. In 1992, she was in my kindergarten class. Her family moved away from kindergarten after kindergarten ended, or before kindergarten ended, and I didn't get a chance to pass on the hand-printed pottery piece she made all those years ago. It's been on my shelf all these years because I didn't know how to find her. So if this is Anastasia, maybe you could call me back. I'd love to hear all about how you're doing. I couldn't believe my ears. For a moment, I felt like I was transported back to that tiny classroom, to a time when a shy Russian little girl who didn't know English found comfort in the presence of her teacher's unwavering kindness. The woman I admired so deeply, who made me feel so safe, y'all, I'm getting emotional, in such an uncertain environment, took the time to find me after all these years. I had no idea how she managed to do that, as my phone number had changed so many times over the years. I didn't wait a second to respond. I texted her immediately, even though it was late in the evening. Mrs. Abraham, I can't believe you found me. I will call you tomorrow and would love to catch up. Instant reply. Is it really you, Anastasia? I've never forgotten you. Tears streamed down my face. If only Mrs. Abraham had known the profound impact she had made on that little girl's life 30 years before this day. The next day, I got into my parked car, which tends to be the quietest place for a mom, and nervously dialed Mrs. Abraham. She picked up right away with a cheerful, Hello, Anastasia. I've been waiting for this moment for 30 years. I couldn't believe it. How could this woman who has taught over 40 years still remember me? Mrs. Abraham wanted to know every detail of my life since I left kindergarten. Through the tears, I began catching her up and bridging the gap of 30 years with the many stories that led me to where I am today. I shared my life message about fear with her and the music I'd created. I told her about my amazing husband, my beautiful daughters, and all the foster children who had come through our home. Over our time on the phone together, we shared tears and laughter and a lot of emotions. We were both a beautiful mess. She told me that whenever she saw that little handprint on her shelf, she would think of me and hope I was doing well. She mailed me my handprint a few days later, and when it arrived, I slowly opened the package and brought that little hand close to my heart. An overwhelming sense of gratitude filled me as I held the hand of the little girl I was 30 years earlier, realizing how far I had come since then. I mused over the thought that this little girl had no idea what would come of her life back then. I've been friends with Mrs. Abraham ever since. She'll text me randomly and tell me how proud she is of the woman I'd become. When I shared my song, No Longer Afraid, with her, she called me the next day asking if she could share the song with her teacher network on Facebook. I couldn't believe that scared little girl, she said, I met on the first day of school in 1991 is singing about being fearless. Well, the truth is, she went on from a fearful little refugee girl to a fearless woman. Let's go. I often wonder what would have happened to that little girl if she allowed the fears of her life to control her future. I imagine she would have stayed a timid, fearful woman with many facades and secrets. Instead, she decided to push through and forge a path to a powerful future of confronting her fears head on and rising above them with each stride. Fear is an interesting thing. It can be debilitating, but it can also reveal certain aspects of yourself that are ready to be free. I wish facing them were easier, but I have found that the only way to step out from under the oppressive shadow of fear is to grab a hold of courage and face them head on. The most remarkable discovery I have made about facing a fear is that when you choose to run towards it rather than running from it, you can turn the fear into an unexpected source of empowerment, unlocking the strength you never imagined was within you. I wonder if there's a fear that you've been hiding behind. I also wonder if deep inside, a little girl or boy is yearning to embrace a life they once deemed impossible, even in their wildest dreams. Whether you are afraid to face the shame of your past, afraid of vulnerability or intimacy in your relationships, or afraid to live out the dreams you were born for, the only path to true freedom is to confront those daunting fears head on. Who knows? Perhaps you'll discover that they were nothing more than tiny poodles. You'll understand this story if you read chapter 1. I know there will be more fears in my future. And I also know that I have what I need already inside of me to face them when they come. But if there's one thing I know for certain, it is that fear is a liar who will hold you back from your destiny. So dare to imagine what your life would look like if you chose to live no longer afraid. I had to read you that epilogue because while I was writing the book, I got this call from Mrs. Abraham. Y'all, she found me after all those years. I mean, I don't even know what this woman did to find me. She contacted places and paid websites to get my phone number, but this woman found me, and we had just the most beautiful encounter where I was able to share my entire journey of the book, which was funny because I was in the middle of writing the book. And so what I want to say with that is it took me back to that little girl that was never, ever imagining a future that I live in today. Because of how much fear and stuttering took me out from a young age, I thought there was not one possible chance that my life would be where it is today. And whether it's through the journey of inner healing or allowing God to confront fear by fear and watching Him use that as a platform for other people to be set free, to be healed on their own journeys. So yeah, I wanted to share that epilogue with you. And I also wanted to share something with you and encourage you with this. When I started writing the book originally, I was writing it or maybe relating the book more to someone in the church or someone that has a Christian perspective on life. And then I just felt the Holy Spirit nudging me to make it relatable to anybody, because fear is such a universal thing. Fear has impacted and destroyed so many people's lives, and it doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, everybody is facing the same giant. And so I actually had the book re-edited to where I wanted it to be applicable and touch those that have no language for the Bible. Obviously, I put so much truth in it, but I also had this desire that if you are someone that's listening and you have relationships in your life with people that don't know the Lord, like this would be the most amazing tool, because there are activations that actually enable people to have conversations with God, even though they're not believers. And so my goal was to make it applicable for people that actually don't have language don't have maybe a language for a lot of the things that they're facing, as you know, as we do as Christians. And so I found myself just praying and just developing a heart for just people in the world with fear. And so I'm excited because I have so many relationships outside of the church and outside of like my Christian community of just people that are struggling with fear, that are struggling with anxiety. And I'm excited to share this book with them. I literally bought so many copies for myself so that I could just give people that I meet on the streets that really truly anybody could relate to the message of fear, having to face fear. And so if you are buying the book or are going to buy the book, I would just want to even encourage you, buy 2 copies and share it with someone who doesn't know the Lord. Like, wouldn't it be cool for you to just like hand a copy to someone that maybe you meet on the street, maybe knows the Lord or doesn't matter. But I just want to say that when in the middle of the writing process, the Lord met me so deeply and he gave me a heart for just people in the world that don't have the Lord to run to, that don't have Psalm 91 in their minds. You know, a lot of times when I think of Psalm 91, I think of it's like the Psalm of refuge. It's like the Psalm of, you know, finding peace in the midst of our storm. And a lot of people that were coming to mind, they didn't have truth in their life and they weren't believers. And so it would be my greatest joy and desire that if you buy the book, you would share it with an unbeliever or someone who doesn't know Jesus personally, but would encounter Jesus through these chapters and through just conversations with the Lord. So yeah, I'm really excited for this day. I'm excited for all that God is going to do because the book is really just a part of my life message. So yeah, grab a copy on Amazon. It's available today, May 7th. So make sure to check it out. And grab a couple copies. I really just want to encourage you. Don't just get it for yourself. Get it for a friend that's struggling with, you know, fear or whatever, that needs encouragement. So yeah, this conversation, I wanted to also share with you that when I started the podcast, this is just real talk, y'all. I'm just going to have a quick sip of my tea. When I launched the podcast, it was originally around the book. But I felt like God started doing a deeper thing inside of me as I was having these conversations, powerful conversations with different people. I found myself enjoying myself so much, and just hearing your feedback and the testimonies that were coming in was just moving my heart, and also just showing me that there is a need for conversations like this. So the podcast will continue. We're not going to stop here. The podcast is something that I plan on continuing, maybe not every week, but as we move on, I will definitely continue to record episodes because I just know the power of this message. I know that there's so much power in facing our fears, and at the end of the day, it's the truth that comes alive that changes our life. It's the truth that we know, truth that we meet as a person, because truth is not words on a page. Truth is a person, and his name is Jesus. And God didn't give you a spirit of fear, but he actually gave you the ability. He gave you the ability to face every single fear that might have tried to layer itself over your life. He gave you the ability to face it. He gave you power, love, and a sound mind. And so, so today we celebrate, and I hope you grab your copy. We're going to leave a link in the comments below. So make sure to order No Longer Afraid, Learning to Live Without Fear.